The archive room was supposed to be sealed. According to the county clerk's ledger, the boxes marked MCD 54 October had been lost in the courthouse fire of 1974. Yet, in the summer of 2009, when a graduate researcher from the University of Kentucky was combing through misfiled probate records, she found something that should not have existed. Inside a cardboard box, water-stained and nearly crumbling, was a manila folder stamped in red ink, Ashcroft family, do not release. The file began with a police report dated October 12, 1954. McDowell County, West Virginia. Deputies had been summoned to the Ashcroft family plot just outside a hollow known to locals as Cane Ridge. A child's coffin had been exhumed under suspicion of vandalism. What they found was worse than desecration. The coffin was empty. The record is brief, almost unnervingly so. The report states, subject, male 7 years of age, was interred 2 weeks prior. Grave showed signs of recent disturbance. Coffin recovered and opened. No remains present. Family offered no explanation. Case closed at sheriff's discretion. 2 weeks earlier, the boy had been buried with a documented death certificate signed by Dr. Walter Brimley, a local physician. Neighbors had attended the funeral, and one even recalled seeing the boy's body with her own eyes. Yet, when deputies lifted the lid, the pine box was vacant. No soil collapse, no flooding, no animal tracks. Just an empty container. An obituary published in the Bluefield Daily Telegraph confirmed the burial. It named the child as Nathaniel Ashcroft, age 7, and carried the line that now chills anyone who reads it. He was beloved, and he will not be forgotten. What happened between the funeral and the exhumation? That question haunted the single-page file. Attached by a rusted paperclip was a handwritten note, unsigned, possibly from a deputy. It read only, do not pursue. The Ashcrofts don't stay where you put them. According to county records, the case was sealed and never reopened. No further investigation is logged, and Nathaniel's name does not appear again in any census or tax ledger after 1954. But this was not the first time, nor would it be the last, that the Ashcrofts were associated with graves that refused to stay filled. The graduate researcher who uncovered the file in 2009 later reported sleepless nights. She said she began to dream of a hymn she had never heard before, sung in a voice that was not her own. 3 months after her discovery, she withdrew from her program and disappeared from public record. Friends say she told them in her last phone call that she had seen the boy from the obituary. She said he hadn't aged a day. This fragment of evidence, a misfiled report, a burned edge of an obituary, a single unsigned note, forces us to ask the question, was this a case of mental illness among an isolated Appalachian family, or was it something darker, something passed down through bloodlines, something that made them what locals once called the family that couldn't die? The philosopher Emile Chiron once wrote, to be cursed is to outlive your own death. Was this what afflicted the Ashcrofts? Were they victims of disease, of delusion, or of a generational ritual no outsider was meant to see? And yet, the Ashcrofts were not alone. Across McDowell, Harlan, and Pike counties, oral records whisper of surnames that carried the same burden. Families that seemed to reappear across decades with faces unchanged, lineages that left no tombstones behind. One thing is certain, the file we were never meant to see was not supposed to survive the courthouse fire. The fact that it does raises another question, who wanted it found? If you've ever heard the name Ashcroft spoken in your family tree, if your grandmother warned you of certain hymns never to sing, or of a cabin in Cane Ridge you were told never to visit, tell us. Write your story below and let it be known. And subscribe, because every comment brings another file to light, and even this one may vanish tomorrow. To understand the Ashcrofts and why their story clung to silence for so long, you have to understand the place they came from. Not the Appalachia of tourist postcards and mountain ballads, but a hollow carved out by coal seams and desperation, where whole families were trapped in cycles of work and debt so deep that generations were born and buried without ever leaving the ridge line. The town in question doesn't appear on many maps anymore. Officially, it was called Cane Ridge Junction, a settlement in McDowell County, West Virginia, though locals simply called it the Junction. In its prime, sometime around the 1920s, it had a population of nearly 1,200. A company store, a church, a one-room schoolhouse, and rows of shotgun shacks lined the muddy road that led to the mine entrance. By the 1930s, when the Ashcrofts' name first appears in scattered records, the town was already in decline. The seams had thinned. The company, unwilling to pay for safer shafts or modern equipment, closed the mine altogether in 1934. Within 2 years, nearly 3/4 of the residents had left, seeking work elsewhere or simply vanishing into the larger counties. What was left was a shell of a town, inhabited mostly by those too poor, too proud, or too bound to family land to move. Isolation has a way of fermenting folklore. When outsiders stopped coming, when the roads washed out in spring floods and the rail spur rusted, Cane Ridge became something closer to an island. And on islands, secrets grow. An excerpt from a Works Progress Administration field journal in 1937 describes the town bluntly. This settlement is notable for its extreme poverty, its reliance on barter, and its inhabitants' reluctance to discuss the past. Numerous abandoned homes stand with their doors chained shut, though locals insist no one ever left them. That same year, a flood carried off half the main road. It was never rebuilt. By the 1950s, the school had closed, the church's steeple collapsed, and the population dropped below 100. Today, if you drive through the valley, you won't see the name on a road sign. Cane Ridge Junction has been erased not just from maps but from official histories. And yet, in forgotten hollows like this, families like the Ashcrofts endured. Their land, carved into the hillside, remained unclaimed even after the mine company dissolved. Tax ledgers suggest they continued to live there long after others left, but without filing census reports or deeds. The state considered the property abandoned. But photographs from a 1958 survey show smoke curling from the chimney of the Ashcroft home, even though the records list the house as empty. The geography of the town itself seemed to lend itself to secrecy. The hollow was cut so deep into the ridges that daylight barely touched its floor for more than a few hours each day. Dense woods pressed in on all sides, swallowing sound. Neighbors claimed that if someone screamed at night, the echoes would carry up the ridge but never down into the valley. It was as if the town itself was designed to contain voices. What happens to belief in a place like this, where poverty blurs into superstition, and where the outside world forgets you exist? Local accounts describe rituals that mixed frontier Christianity with older, stranger traditions. Songs sung at midnight wakes, carved symbols left on barn doors, and whispered prayers that no preacher had ever taught. This mixture of faith and fear gave Cane Ridge its reputation. Some called it cursed. Others said it was protected. But everyone agreed that it was different. An entry from a traveling social worker's notebook in 1941 reads, "Families here refuse standard burials. Coffins are often left shallow, and graves show signs of repeated disturbance. When asked, the townsfolk explain only that it is necessary to be sure they don't come back wrong. I have recommended further study. No further study ever came. The war effort pulled attention elsewhere, and the government turned its back on these ridges once the coal stopped flowing. Cane Ridge Junction was left to rot, left to its own stories, left to families like the Ashcrofts, families whose names appear in obituaries but not in cemeteries. The collapse of the town created the perfect conditions for secrets to root themselves. A forgotten valley, a dwindling population, a community that distrusted outsiders and refused to speak plainly about its dead. When the Ashcrofts vanished from census records after 1928, no one asked why. When their house was photographed as inhabited in 1958, no one challenged the contradiction. And when a boy's coffin was dug up in 1954, empty, no state official ever followed through. In a place left off the map, the rules of history don't apply. Documents vanish. Files burn. Graves come up empty. This is where the Ashcrofts lived. This is where the story begins to grow roots. But to understand the curse, or whatever force bound them, we must trace not just the hollow but the bloodline. Because even in the poorest, most isolated corners of Appalachia, names leave trails. And the Ashcrofts' name leaves a trail of shadows. The Ashcrofts were not a large family, at least not in the way Appalachian clans usually stretched across counties and generations. They appeared suddenly in records as if out of nowhere, and then disappeared just as quickly, leaving only fragments behind. Census entries, jail ledgers, and obituaries without graves. The first official mention of the surname comes from the 1920 federal census for McDowell County. The entry lists a Samuel Ashcroft, age 42, farmer, along with his wife Miriam, 39, and 3 children. Joseph, 12, Esther, 9, and Elias, 6. The census taker scrawled the words foreign-born in the margin but never specified from where. In fact, their column 4 place of birth was left blank. That omission is strange. Census takers were meticulous, even intrusive, often guessing if they didn't know. For an entire family to be left without origin suggests either refusal or intimidation. Some researchers believe the Ashcrofts may have bribed or threatened the official, ensuring no record of where they came from. Others think the blank space was deliberate, a silent warning to anyone who might look closer. After 1920, the name appears again in county arrest records. In 1924, Samuel Ashcroft was charged with grave disturbance after being caught digging at night in the Cane Ridge Cemetery. The sheriff's notes state, subject claimed he was ensuring proper burial. Released after 48 hours. No charges pursued. The following year, Esther, then age 10, was removed from school for disturbing peers with repeated chanting during lessons. A teacher's logbook, now housed in the state archives, notes, child sings verses unknown to me. Melodies do not match known hymns. Claimed her mother taught her the song. When asked to repeat it, other children cried. By 1928, the entire family vanishes from census listings. Their names never appear in the 1930 federal roll. It is as if the Ashcrofts ceased to exist. Yet, land records from that same year list tax payments made under Samuel's name. He was alive enough to pay but invisible to the census takers. Even more troubling, obituaries begin to surface in regional newspapers. One clipping from the Bluefield Daily Telegraph in 1931 records the death of Elias Ashcroft, age 17, from unknown fever. The obituary states he was buried in Cane Ridge, yet no grave marker exists and no death certificate was filed. 2 years later, in 1933, another obituary announces the death of Miriam Ashcroft. Again, no burial records survive. Jail ledgers provide the last verifiable sightings. In 1935, a Joseph Ashcroft was arrested for assault after allegedly attacking a neighbor who accused the family of stealing chickens. He was released 2 days later, charges dropped. After that, his name does not reappear in any county record. One might assume the Ashcrofts moved away as so many did after the mine collapse. Yet, oral testimony suggests otherwise. Interviews conducted in the 1970s with aging residents describe the family as still up there on the ridge. One man recalled seeing Samuel chopping wood in 1949, nearly 30 years after his last official appearance. Another swore she saw Miriam walking along the creek bed in the late 1950s, decades after her supposed death. The contradictions deepen. In 1954, when 7-year-old Nathaniel Ashcroft's coffin was unearthed and found empty, researchers tried to map his relation to the earlier family. His obituary listed his parents as Joseph and Esther, siblings from the original 1920 census. If accurate, it meant brother and sister had produced a child together. But Nathaniel himself had no birth record. No doctor's signature, no county certificate. His existence is documented only in the obituary and in the sheriff's brief, unsettling report about the empty coffin. Families vanish from records all the time. Fires destroy files. Migration erases trails. But the Ashcrofts are different. Their absence feels deliberate, as though each gap in the archive was cut with a knife. When names do appear, they are tied to death, disturbance, or rumor. The strangest artifact comes from a 1937 census draft, never officially filed but preserved in a field folder by a government clerk. In neat handwriting, the clerk lists Samuel Ashcroft, age 42. The same age Samuel had been in 1920. Next to it, he scribbles a question mark, then underlines it twice. How could Samuel still be 42 17 years later? Clerical error, perhaps, or something else. Historians who examine these fragments are divided. Some say the Ashcrofts were nothing more than victims of bureaucratic neglect, their story twisted by isolation and superstition. Others argue the gaps are too clean, too pointed to be chance. There is a theory whispered among archivists, not published in journals but passed along in late-night conversations. It suggests that families like the Ashcrofts learned how to disappear from paper without disappearing from the land. They found ways to make themselves invisible to the state, even as they carried on their own lives, births, and rituals in secret. But if that is true, why do their names keep resurfacing in obituaries? Why do neighbors swear they saw them years, even decades, after their documented deaths? The Ashcrofts were the family the records forgot. Or perhaps the family that refused to let records tell their story. And if the fragments we have are all that remain, one truth seems unavoidable. Whether by ritual, by curse, or by something stranger, the Ashcrofts were never meant to be tracked by the living. If you peel back the layers of any Appalachian town, you find two religions. The one spoken from the pulpit on Sundays and the one whispered in kitchens and barns when no preacher is near. Cane Ridge Junction was no different. Its church, built in 1902 by the mining company, was a squat wooden structure with peeling paint and a steeple that leaned against the wind. By the 1930s, when the Ashcrofts came into focus, the congregation had dwindled. Yet beneath its floorboards in the basement where mold ate at the stone, a second faith took root, one never written in scripture but remembered in ritual. Accounts of this basement come from scattered testimony. In 1973, a field researcher for the West Virginia Folklife Project interviewed a man named Luther Pritchard, one of the last surviving residents of Cane Ridge. His words are preserved on a reel-to-reel tape, the hiss of age almost louder than his voice. It wasn't preaching down there. It was something else. They said prayers, sure, but not to the Lord I knew. They read from a Bible that wasn't a Bible. Handwritten. Passed down. They sang things you didn't hear above ground. That's where the Ashcrofts went, always first, always last to leave. Fragments of that handwritten text may still exist. In 1992, a state archivist cataloging donations from a private collector came across a leather-bound book labeled Hymns for the Watch. The pages were brittle, the ink smeared, but several verses stood out. They bore no resemblance to psalms or gospel hymns, yet mimicked their cadence. Bury not with nail nor stone. Keep the flesh, keep the bone. Wake them once and wake them thrice. Blood remembers. Blood is price. The refrain repeated, wake them thrice. Cross-referencing this with oral testimony paints a picture of the rituals the Ashcrofts and others may have practiced. Children were not buried immediately. Instead, the family would wake the body, sitting beside it 3 nights in a row, singing low hymns, sometimes rocking the corpse as if lulling it to sleep. Only on the 3rd night would burial occur, and even then the graves were shallow, easy to reopen. A 1940 school punishment ledger discovered in the state archive adds another disturbing detail. A teacher recorded multiple instances of students, some with the Ashcroft surname, being disciplined for refusing daylight prayers, and instead repeating the phrase, "We do not rest, we rise." One boy was beaten with a switch for drawing a circle with 3 slashes through it on the classroom wall. When asked why, he told the teacher, "It keeps them near." Neighbors grew uneasy, especially when funerals seemed to last longer than expected. One woman recalled attending a burial where the coffin lid was nailed shut only after midnight hymns had been sung. She claimed she heard scratching sounds inside the box before it was lowered. Others dismissed it as the creak of wood and the paranoia of grief, but the story spread. The basement of the Cane Ridge Church became the center of suspicion. Locals whispered that the Ashcrofts conducted ceremonies there, not on Sundays but during storms when thunder masked the singing. Some said they lit no lamps, only salt candles that hissed and sparked. A field report from 1951 describes wax circles discovered in the basement after the church had officially closed. Inside the circles were scraps of cloth and what appeared to be locks of hair. It wasn't only about death. The Ashcrofts' rituals seemed to blur the line between discipline and devotion. Family diaries, retrieved from an estate sale in 1986, describe punishments that sound more like rites. Children were made to kneel on kernels of corn for hours, chanting verses copied from the handwritten hymnal. Misbehavior was corrected not by switching but by keeping them awake. One entry reads, "Joseph would not listen, so we kept him awake 3 nights. He does not disobey now." This fixation on wakefulness, of refusing rest, of blurring death and sleep, threads through every surviving fragment. It suggests a doctrine obsessed not with salvation, but with continuity, with never allowing the body or soul to fully surrender. To the Ashcrofts, death was not final. It was interruption, a pause to be managed, delayed, or undone. And what began in the church basement seeped into the town itself. Doors marked with symbols. Lullabies that sounded more like warnings. Graves revisited, sometimes opened, sometimes resealed. Outsiders dismissed it as hill superstition. Insiders kept silent, fearing they would be next to kneel on the cold stone floor beneath the steeple. The rituals became a generational inheritance. Children grew up watching their parents sing over the dead, watching siblings forced to stay awake until they cried blood. For the Ashcrofts it was normal. For everyone else it was unthinkable. But unthinkable does not mean it did not happen. The evidence lies scattered. A hymn copied by hand, a punishment logged by a weary teacher, an interview recorded on a reel that now gathers dust. These fragments reveal a pattern too consistent to dismiss as rumor. The Ashcrofts believed the dead could be held near, and they acted on that belief with songs, with symbols, with sleepless vigils. It is one thing to keep stories alive. It is another to keep bodies from leaving. And eventually, as always happens in forgotten towns, the outside world noticed. A teacher spoke too loudly. A doctor filed a report. And the rituals of the Ashcrofts, once contained to the basement of a collapsing church, spilled into the newspapers and courtrooms of West Virginia. That moment, when the outside world finally took notice, marked the first time the curse of the Ashcrofts left Cane Ridge. and it would not be the last. For decades, the Ashcrofts' practices remained hidden in Cane Ridge's shadows, whispered about by neighbors but never written down in any official account. It might have stayed that way if not for a single report, the kind of small-town incident that would normally have been forgotten within weeks. But this one left a paper trail, and once written, it could not be entirely erased. The year was 1937. The nation was clawing its way out of the Great Depression, and even the most isolated valleys of Appalachia were being brushed by the hand of government relief programs. One of those programs, the Works Progress Administration, sent inspectors and teachers into forgotten communities, documenting conditions and reporting back to Washington. In March of that year, a new teacher was assigned to the Cane Ridge one-room schoolhouse. Her name was Miss Caroline Webb, age 22, a graduate from Marshall College. Fresh-faced and armed with WPA teaching manuals, she stepped into the hollow unaware of its shadows. What she found would unsettle her enough to write letters that survive to this day. According to her first monthly report, dated April 1937, the children were polite but strangely fatigued. She noted that many fell asleep during lessons, sometimes refusing to wake even when shaken. Some bore marks on their knees, as if from extended kneeling. Most disturbing of all, one child, identified only as NA age 7, had been absent for 2 weeks. When asked, other children claimed he had gone to sleep under the house. Miss Webb dismissed it at first as a childish phrase. But in May the boy returned to class. He was pale, silent, and unresponsive, though other students whispered his name as if it carried weight: Nathaniel. Her report from that month includes a chilling note. Child appears not to recall my name, though he had done so before. Hands cold to touch. He sings quietly to himself when left alone, song not in any hymnal I know. Alarmed, Webb wrote a letter to the county superintendent. That letter, preserved in the county education file, reads: "There is a child here whose family is known as Ashcroft. I was informed of his passing by neighbors only a fortnight ago, yet the same boy now attends class. When questioned, his family denied his death. They claimed only that I was mistaken. But several mothers in the town confirmed they saw his burial. What am I to do?" The superintendent never responded. 2 months later, tragedy struck again. A neighboring child, unrelated to the Ashcrofts, died of pneumonia. Webb attended the burial out of respect. She later confided in her journal, later donated by her surviving niece, that she saw members of the Ashcroft family stand too near the grave, whispering verses as the coffin was lowered. 3 nights later, she claimed she heard the dead child's voice outside her window. It was this experience that drove Webb to write directly to the Bluefield Daily Telegraph. In July of 1937, the paper published a short, cautious piece. Local teacher alleges strange practices in Hollow School. Miss Caroline Webb, a WPA instructor, has reported unusual burial customs and unexplained absences among families in Cane Ridge Junction. The report has drawn concern but no official action at this time. The article caused a stir in surrounding towns, but the story was quickly buried. Weeks later, the newspaper retracted the piece, citing errors in witness testimony. Webb herself was reassigned to another county by autumn. But she did not remain silent. Her personal journal continued for several years. One entry from 1939 is particularly haunting. "I no longer dream of my family home. Only of coffins opened. The Ashcroft boy stands at the foot of my bed. His eyes never close. I fear I will die if I keep writing, but I fear worse if I stop." Her handwriting trails off after 1940. She died in 1942 of what her death certificate lists as nervous exhaustion. She was only 27. For the first time, the Ashcrofts' practices had brushed against the outside world, leaving ink on paper, leaving a witness whose testimony was too vivid to dismiss. And though officials silenced the story in newspapers and reassigned the teacher, the record survived. A file too small to burn every copy. A journal that resurfaced decades later. The event marked the beginning of a new phase in the Ashcroft story, one where outsiders, however briefly, glimpsed the rituals that Cane Ridge had long concealed. A child thought buried returned to school. A teacher dared to report it. And for a fleeting moment, the world beyond the hollow noticed that something was wrong. But those who notice do not last long. And the next person who spoke, the next witness to carry the Ashcroft name into public light, would vanish completely. If Caroline Webb's letters cracked the door open on the Ashcroft story, the testimony of a single young woman in 1961 nearly tore it off the hinges. And like every witness before her, she would not survive long after speaking. Her name was Mary Ellen Ashcroft, age 24. She was admitted to the state asylum in Weston, West Virginia, on January 8, 1961, under the diagnosis of hysteria and religious delusion. According to hospital intake records, which still exist, yellowed and brittle in the state archives, she was brought in by her uncle after weeks of persistent chanting and refusal to sleep. Her file is chilling. The attending physician's notes read, "Patient repeats phrases for hours without pause. Chief among them, we do not rest. We do not rot. We return. Refuses food unless it is placed in threes. Claims her family cannot die. When pressed, she insists that graves are temporary, that the dead must be woken, or they will wander." Unlike the hushed whispers of neighbors or the second-hand clippings of teachers, Mary Ellen spoke directly. She named names, described rituals, and identified herself as part of the bloodline. In her second evaluation, she told the doctor, "You cannot bury an Ashcroft. You can only hide us for a while. My brother was buried 3 times. He came back each time. The hymn keeps us. The hymn binds us. And if you stop singing, then we come back wrong." The psychiatrist noted that her effect was calm, her speech steady. She did not appear manic. She spoke as though describing a household chore. This unnerving normalcy convinced at least one intern at the asylum that she was not delusional, but reporting lived experience. Over the next month, Mary Ellen's file expanded with further testimony. She described a basement service beneath the Cane Ridge Church where the dead were kept awake with song. She admitted to participating in 3-night vigils for infants in her family, rocking their small bodies until the hymn took hold. She claimed her mother had died in 1953 but still walked the halls of the house for another year before disappearing into the woods. One excerpt from her third session is particularly disturbing. "When I was 9, they made me sing to my cousin. He had drowned. He was blue and stiff. I sang until my throat bled. On the 3rd night he opened his eyes. He never blinked right again. But he walked. He walked until they put him back down." The doctors debated whether her case was schizophrenia, psychosis induced by sleep deprivation, or ritualized trauma carried from childhood. The asylum's superintendent ordered her kept under sedation. Yet sedation did not silence her completely. Nurses wrote of her humming under her breath, even while heavily drugged. On February 19, 1961, Mary Ellen vanished. According to the asylum's official report, she escaped during the night. Guards found her room empty, the window forced open, footprints in the snow leading to the treeline. No one saw her leave. No trace of her was ever found. But a detail buried in the nurse's log raises deeper questions. One nurse wrote, "Patient heard singing in the hall before disappearance. Several staff confirm hearing it as well, though ward was empty. Voices low, repeating words unintelligible." The log was never followed up. Within weeks, Mary Ellen's file was closed, labeled escaped patient. Her family never inquired after her. The county did not search. Her name disappeared from official record, as though the state itself agreed to forget her. Yet fragments of her voice survive. In 1978, a graduate student researching Appalachian folklore requested copies of asylum transcripts. Among the files sent to her, she found Mary Ellen's testimony. The student published excerpts in a regional folklore journal. The article was suppressed within months, but not before a few libraries archived copies. In those pages, Mary Ellen's words echo still, "We do not rest. We do not rot. We return." To this day, no body has ever been found. Some locals insist she returned to Cane Ridge, joining her kin in the hollow. Others claim she never left the asylum at all, that she was buried in an unmarked grave on hospital grounds. A darker theory suggests she did not escape, but was taken, called back by the very hymn she could not stop singing. Whatever the truth, Mary Ellen remains the only Ashcroft to ever testify at length about her family's rituals in her own voice. She described the curse not as myth, but as daily practice. And for that she vanished. The lesson is clear. In this story, witnesses do not last. Teachers die young. Patients disappear. Journalists lose their notes in fires that burn at just the right time. And if those who speak do not survive, then who silenced them? That question leads us into the next chapter of the Ashcroft curse. Not just the families who refused to die, but the sheriffs, pastors, and officials who ensured the truth would never fully live. If the Ashcroft's curse was carried in blood, its silence was enforced by fire. Every time a record surfaced, it seemed to vanish again, burned, erased, dismissed as hysteria. For decades, pieces of the story tried to claw their way into daylight. Each time, someone made sure they did not survive. The most notorious of these erasures occurred in 1974, when the McDowell County Courthouse caught fire. Officially, the blaze was blamed on faulty wiring, but former employees interviewed years later claimed they saw boxes of files being carried out the night before. When the flames consumed the record room, it was the family files that burned hottest. A custodian named Harold Green told a folklorist in 1981, "I saw the boxes stamped with names. Ashcroft was one of them. Pritchard Whitlock too. They went into the sheriff's truck. Next day, nothing left but ash. And no one asked why. That fire destroyed marriage records, death certificates, property deeds, the very documents that would have proven whether the Ashcrofts lived, died, or continued unnaturally in Cane Ridge." The official report listed total loss of genealogical archive. Unofficially, it was the perfect cover. But suppression began long before the fire. As early as the 1930s, journalists who pursued the story were silenced. In 1938, a reporter for the Charleston Gazette wrote drafts about Caroline Webb's claims of a buried child returning to school. His notes were confiscated by county police after his car was found burned on the edge of Harlan County. His death was ruled mechanical fault. His drafts were never seen again. Pastors too played their part. A leather-bound diary belonging to Reverend Jonah Miller, pastor of the Cane Ridge Church from 1925 to 1947, surfaced briefly at an estate auction in the 1990s. Inside were fragmentary entries. "They come to me for blessing but not for Christ. They ask me to sing the hymn, not the Psalms. I refused. They brought the child anyway. Eyes open in the coffin. I fear my words will damn me if I write more." The diary ends abruptly in July 1947. No further entries. Court suppression followed the same pattern. In 1959, when a neighboring family attempted to sue the Ashcrofts for grave disturbance, the case was dismissed before reaching trial. Court minutes show the judge citing lack of sufficient evidence. Yet witnesses swore under oath that they saw Ashcroft men dig up a coffin in broad daylight. The transcript ends with the phrase, "testimony stricken from record." Even law enforcement seemed complicit. Sheriff Randall Price, who presided during the 1954 exhumation of Nathaniel Ashcroft's empty coffin, closed the case within 24 hours. His handwritten note, the one that read, "The Ashcrofts don't stay where you put them," is the only surviving fragment. Price himself died suddenly in 1956 of heart failure. His family later claimed his office was ransacked weeks before his death. It wasn't just documents that vanished. People did too. The WPA teacher, Caroline Webb, reassigned and dead within 5 years. Mary Ellen, gone from the asylum without a trace. Journalists intimidated into silence. Locals who dared to speak of the Ashcrofts often recanted, or else moved away under pressure. A pattern emerges. Whenever the Ashcrofts' practices drew attention, whenever the story threatened to spread beyond Cane Ridge, someone higher up closed the book. Fires, accidents, dismissed testimony, burned cars, torn pages. What? One theory suggests local officials feared scandal, the kind that could doom already dying towns. In the mid-20th century, when coal money still had strings to pull, counties could not afford to be branded as cursed. Better to erase a family's shame than risk the region's reputation. Another theory is darker. It proposes that suppression was not cover-up, but complicity. That sheriffs, judges, even pastors may have been part of the ritual. That they benefited from it, feared breaking it, or shared in its power. After all, suppression takes work. Files do not burn themselves. Evidence for this theory appears in a 1963 memo between county commissioners. The typewritten line reads, "Matter concerning Ashcroft family to remain internal. Public knowledge may cause unrest. Continue as before." Continue what, exactly? The Ashcrofts were not merely ignored. They were protected. Shielded from scrutiny. Insulated by officials whose careers outlasted scandal after scandal. The silence was systemic, woven through county, church, and courthouse. Suppression ensured that the family's curse, whether superstition or something worse, never faced daylight. It also ensured that every witness who spoke was left exposed, abandoned to their fate. By the late 1970s, the Ashcrofts had almost entirely vanished from official record. Census rolls, tax ledgers, church rosters, all empty. But if the family line had truly ended, why did residents in 1987 report seeing light in the windows of the Ashcroft house? Why did hunters in 1999 hear voices singing near the abandoned church? Why did trespassers in 2006 swear they saw faces staring from the darkened glass? Suppression burned the files. But it did not kill the story. And when the records are ash, when the testimonies are struck, only one thing remains: the places themselves. The house, the church, the land where rituals were sung and graves disturbed. Which brings us to the Ashcroft home, a building still standing, still wrong, still carrying the weight of everything that was meant to be erased. If paper records can burn, buildings cannot lie so easily. And of all the remnants of Cane Ridge, one structure has refused to fall: the Ashcroft house. It sits on a slope above the hollow, a two-story frame house built sometime around 1915. The roof sags, the paint is gone, and its porch has rotted into the earth. Yet photographs taken over decades show it still standing, stubborn against storms, floods, and the slow rot that claimed every other home in the valley. The Ashcroft house has outlasted its neighbors, as though decay itself avoids it. The first written account of its strangeness comes from 1987, when two hikers, college students from Charleston, trespassed on the property. They later gave interviews to a local paper, describing how they found furniture still arranged, dishes on the table, even a child's toy left on the floor, as if the family had stepped out only moments before. One of the hikers claimed he heard movement upstairs. When he climbed the staircase, he found the hall lined with mirrors, each draped in black cloth. He lifted one corner. The glass was unbroken, but he swore the reflection did not match the room behind him. In 1999, the house drew attention again. Paranormal investigators from Huntington drove out with cameras and tape recorders. Their notes, later uploaded to a now-defunct message board, detail a night of relentless phenomena. Doors slammed without wind. Photographs blurred into streaks of white light. One investigator claimed to hear a hymn sung in 3 voices, though no one else in the group recognized the tune. When the team returned a week later, their audio tapes were blank. Every reel had erased itself. In 2006, a group of urban explorers visited, filming their exploration for an early YouTube channel. The footage, since scrubbed from the site, reportedly showed one of them speaking in a voice not his own. According to a cached transcript, he whispered, "We do not rest. We do not rot. We return." The young man suffered a breakdown days later. His family insisted he had no history of mental illness. Locals avoid the property entirely. Hunters cut wide circles around it. Teenagers who try to spend a night there rarely last past midnight. One boy told police in 2012 that he saw faces looking out of the wallpaper. He refused to describe them further. Despite its abandonment, the house is never fully empty. County property surveys from the 1980s and 1990s note smoke stains near the chimney, even though no one had registered residence there in decades. A 1995 aerial photograph shows light glinting in the upstairs window at midday. When the surveyor returned to take a second shot, the window was black. The house itself seems preserved by more than wood and nails. Rot has consumed barns, churches, and cabins all through Cane Ridge, yet the Ashcroft home clings on. Boards buckle but do not break. Windows crack but never collapse. Some say it endures because no one has dared to tear it down. Others whisper that anyone who tries meets a bad end. One story tells of a demolition crew hired in 1978 to clear the property for development. The crew chief reportedly died in a car accident the night before the job was scheduled. His men refused to proceed. The development never happened. Visitors describe the same sensations inside. A heaviness in the chest, the feeling of being watched, a subtle humming sound that seems to come from the walls themselves. Even skeptics admit the air feels wrong. One folklorist wrote after her visit, "It is not haunted in the way of rattling chains or cold drafts. It is haunted in the way of a body that has not been buried deep enough." Perhaps the most unsettling detail lies in the house's basement. A narrow set of stairs leads down to a dirt floor, where strange symbols have been carved into the stone foundation. Photographs exist, though blurred, showing circles with slashes, much like those drawn by Ashcroft children in their school punishments decades earlier. No one knows how old the carvings are. Some suggest they predate the house itself, evidence that the land was chosen for reasons older than any family name. What is certain is that the Ashcroft house carries forward the silence imposed by courthouse fires and vanished files. It is the last standing archive, a building that remembers what people were forced to forget. And like the family itself, the house seems incapable of dying. Every generation finds it again. A hiker in 1987. Investigators in 1999. Explorers in 2006. Hunters in 2012. Each time they report the same patterns, the same humming, the same sense of eyes in the dark. Each time the house refuses to collapse into ruin. If the Ashcrofts are truly gone, why does their house remain? If their rituals ended with silence, Why do voices still sing in its halls? Buildings are supposed to tell stories of those who once lived within them. The Ashcroft house does not tell. It withholds. It guards. It waits. And it is not alone. Because once researchers began tracing the Ashcroft's rituals, they found patterns in other valleys, in other surnames, in other families who practiced the same rites of waking the dead. The curse was not confined to Cane Ridge. It spread. Which leads us to the next chapter, the disturbing realization that the Ashcrofts were not unique. Other families in other forgotten hollows sang the same hymns, carved the same sigils, and buried their children 3 times. The Ashcrofts were only one branch of America's most cursed bloodline. The Ashcrofts may be the most infamous, but they were not alone. Once investigators began digging into neighboring counties, a chilling pattern emerged. Families scattered across the Appalachian spine, each practicing variations of the same rites, each leaving behind fragments of evidence that point to a network of belief older than any church. The first name that surfaces beyond Cane Ridge is the Pritchards of Wyoming County. Court records from 1929 show several members charged with grave disturbance after neighbors caught them digging at night in the local cemetery. The charges were dropped, but a clerk's note in the margin reads, "Family insisted it was necessary to ensure proper rest. Claimed death not final unless song completed." In Harlan County, the Whitlocks carried a similar reputation. A surviving school roster from 1943 shows multiple Whitlock children enrolled at the same grade level across decades. The handwriting of the teacher changes, but the names, Elias, Ruth, Miriam, repeat exactly. In a letter sent by one teacher to the county board, she asked, "How can I have the same Elias Whitlock in my class in 1924 and again in 1943, with no aging in between?" The board never responded. Then there were the Grimsleys of Pike County. In 1957, a local undertaker reported to the sheriff that Grimsley coffins often weighed far less than they should. In one case, when a coffin tipped during transport, the lid split, revealing nothing but stones inside. The sheriff closed the case within hours, marking it clerical error. The undertaker left town the following year. And in each of these counties, Wyoming, Harlan, Pike, the same hymn appears, scattered in fragments like a disease carried across generations. WPA field notes mention verses sung in low tones, "Wake them once, wake them thrice." Oral interviews from the 1960s record elders speaking of children who don't close their eyes. Even Facebook groups today, small and private, share blurry photographs of barn doors scratched with the same 3/circle found in the Ashcroft basement. Folklorists who study these connections call it a ritual continuum, a thread that ties otherwise unrelated families through song, burial, and silence. But in Appalachia, locals have another word for it. They call it the blood hymn. The blood hymn is not written, not printed, not found in hymnals. It is remembered, passed mouth to mouth, parent to child, body to body. Its survival across families suggests something far deeper than coincidence. If the Ashcrofts were an isolated anomaly, how did the same hymn appear in Harlan, in Pike, in Wyoming? One explanation is cultural diffusion, isolated towns sharing stories, rituals bleeding across ridges. Another is inheritance, branches of the same bloodline spreading outward. Census logs support this possibility. The surnames, Ashcroft, Pritchard, Whitlock, Grimsley, all appear in Cane Ridge records at one time or another. Did they intermarry? Did they split, carrying the hymn with them? A third explanation is more sinister, that these families were not simply related but organized. That the hymn was not accident but doctrine, carried by choice, guarded like scripture, protected across decades. In this view, each hollow was not an isolated superstition but a node in a wider network. A network of families who believed death was a negotiable condition. Whatever the cause, the pattern is undeniable. In 1972, a state anthropologist named Dr. Harold Bennett compiled a private report for the Department of Mental Health. The report, unearthed decades later, documented 27 cases of families across West Virginia and eastern Kentucky who shared identical burial practices. 3-night vigils, shallow graves, disturbances within weeks of burial. His conclusion reads, "The persistence of these rituals across multiple surnames and counties cannot be dismissed as coincidence. They represent a sustained tradition of post-mortem veneration, possibly rooted in pre-Christian European folkways, maintained in secrecy for generations." The report was never published. Bennett's widow later claimed that her husband was warned to abandon the research. He died in 1974, the same year the McDowell courthouse burned. Even into the modern day, whispers of the pattern surface. A 1999 thread on a paranormal bulletin board describes a woman from eastern Kentucky who claimed her grandmother made her sing the hymn over the crib 3 nights in a row. A 2015 Reddit post shows a photograph of a tree carved with a 3/circle, captioned, "Granddad says this keeps the family close." Both posts vanished within weeks, either deleted by users or removed by moderators. The persistence of the blood hymn across counties, decades, and surnames suggests a truth more unsettling than any single haunting. This was not one cursed family. It was a bloodline spread thin across Appalachia, branches interwoven but rooted in the same soil, the same hymn, the same refusal to rest. And patterns do not stay buried. They repeat. They surface. They call attention to themselves again and again. Which brings us to the most disturbing part of the story, the realization that the pattern has not ended. In recent years, new witnesses have begun to report signs of the blood hymn's return. Children humming songs no teacher taught. Women hearing voices of long-dead relatives at night. Symbols carved fresh into trees along forgotten roads. The Ashcrofts may have been the beginning, but they were never the end. And the question now is not whether they died, but whether the hymn has started again. For years, archivists and folklorists comforted themselves with one assumption. Whatever the Ashcrofts and the other cursed families of Appalachia believed, it had died with them. Rituals fade, churches collapse, cemeteries are reclaimed by vines. But starting in the late 1990s, and growing louder through the 2010s, fragments began to surface again. Fragments too precise, too uncanny to dismiss as coincidence. The first came in 1998, when a substitute teacher in Pike County filed a report with the school board. She claimed a third-grade student drew an unfamiliar sigil on his desk during class, a circle with 3 slashes carved through it. When asked what it meant, the boy said, "It keeps them near." The teacher, recalling old folklore she'd read in a university course, recognized the symbol. But when she submitted the report, it was dismissed as a disciplinary matter. In 2004, a police officer in Harlan County logged a disturbance call. A woman had phoned in claiming voices were singing outside her trailer at 2 a.m. When deputies arrived, they found nothing, but the woman, pale and shaking, swore the voices were her grandmother's and uncle's, both dead for years. The officer wrote in his log, "Subject believes family members returned. No signs of trespass." His body cam footage glitched during the interview. By 2011, the reports had moved online. A Facebook post, preserved in screenshots, shows a mother in West Virginia asking if anyone else's child wakes in the night singing old hymns I don't know. The replies, before the thread was deleted, contained dozens of similar claims. Parents across Appalachia describing children humming unfamiliar melodies, always in threes. One wrote, "She doesn't just sing. She doesn't close her eyes." In 2018, a viral Reddit thread surfaced briefly before vanishing. Posted in r/nosleep but written like a police report, it described a foster child in Kentucky who insisted his real family had taught him a song to keep him from rotting. The post ended with the chilling detail that the boy drew a map to a hollow where he said his family still woke their dead. The map led to Cane Ridge. The thread disappeared within days. Then there are the police logs. In 2020, deputies in Wyoming County recorded a trespasser complaint from a farmer who found children carving symbols into trees along his property. The children were never identified. When asked why they were carving, one boy reportedly said, "Because they're coming back." Perhaps the most disturbing case comes from 2022, when a woman in McDowell County posted a video of herself on TikTok. She claimed she had woken to hear her daughter, just 6 years old, humming in her sleep. The tune, she insisted, was not one she had ever taught. She filmed it. The melody matched transcribed fragments of the blood hymn from WPA field notes in the 1930s. The video gained thousands of views before it was deleted. The woman deleted her entire account shortly after. These modern signs suggest something the archives never wanted us to consider. The hymn has survived. Whether in whispers, in children's memories, or in bloodlines that were never truly severed, the rituals of the Ashcrofts and their kin are resurfacing. The return raises an unsettling question. Why now? One theory argues that trauma preserves memory. Appalachia's economic collapse, the mine closures, the opioid epidemic, the hollowing out of entire towns, created a new generation steeped in silence and grief. In such soil, old rituals could take root again. Families turned back to what they remembered, to songs and practices that gave them the illusion of control over death. Another theory suggests something cyclical. Just as the hymn required 3 nights of waking, perhaps the curse itself moves in rhythms. Lying dormant for decades, then returning when conditions align. If so, then the recent sightings, drawings, and songs may not be accidents. They may be inevitabilities. And there is a darker possibility that the hymn itself is alive, that it does not survive through memory alone, but through something carried in blood, waiting to be sung again. Consider this: every resurgence begins with children. Not pastors, not archivists, not professors, children. Drawing the sigil, humming the hymn, speaking of relatives long buried. If the hymn is alive, perhaps children are its vessel. Innocent mouths carrying old words, small hands carving old symbols. If that is true, then the Ashcrofts were never meant to vanish. Their silence was temporary. Their disappearance was only a pause. And now the hymn is returning. The question is not whether the Ashcrofts are gone. It is whether their curse ever ended at all. Because in schoolhouses, in bedrooms, in the woods of Appalachia, the signs are clear. Something that should have died a century ago is stirring again. And if it is beginning with children, then what comes next? There is a detail so strange it borders on impossible. Not the coffins dug up, not the hymns hummed in classrooms, not even the testimonies of teachers and patients. Stranger still is what happens when you write the Ashcroft name. Archivists whisper of it like a curse. Court clerks roll their eyes when asked, but some admit it privately. The phenomenon is this: whenever the name Ashcroft appears in official records, it does not stay still. The earliest trace comes from a 1928 property ledger in McDowell County. In the list of tax-paying households, the Ashcrofts entry is crossed out in red ink. Written above it in the same handwriting is another name, Pritchard. But the tax payment itself, the amount, the land plot, all correspond to the Ashcroft home. Why the change? No explanation is given. In 1943, during jury proceedings in Harlan County, a transcript records testimony against a man named Joseph Ashcroft. Days later, when the same transcript is consulted, the defendant's name is listed as Joseph Whitlock. The handwriting is identical, the court reporter unchanged. But the name has shifted, as though overwritten. The most notorious case comes from 1967, when a graduate student at Marshall University wrote her thesis on Appalachian burial practices. Her draft included 3 chapters on the Ashcrofts. When her committee received the typed manuscript, those chapters had been replaced by blank pages. She swore she had typed them. Her advisor accused her of lying. She left the program. Years later, in an interview, she said, "It wasn't me that erased it. It was the name." In 1993, a genealogist compiling census data on microfilm noticed something even more unnerving. Every time she typed the surname Ashcroft into her software, the file corrupted. The program crashed, sometimes erasing hours of work. When she attempted to write the name by hand, her pen leaked, blotting the word into illegibility. She later told colleagues, "It doesn't want to be written. This is not mere superstition." Scattered fragments of government correspondence confirm it. A 1963 commissioner's memo, still surviving in typewritten form, notes in frustration: the Ashcroft name continues to appear across multiple case files spanning decades. Same handwriting. Same signature. Impossible to reconcile. Recommend further suppression. The memo refers to signatures across county court cases, dated as far apart as 1912 and 1959, but bearing identical pen strokes. A Samuel Ashcroft signing for a land deed in 1912. The same Samuel Ashcroft signing for a bail bond in 1959. The signatures match perfectly as if photocopied. But photocopiers did not exist in 1912. And then there is the anomaly of Mary Ellen's asylum file. In the surviving transcripts, her surname shifts across pages. Sometimes written as Ashcroft. Sometimes as Ashford. Once as Pritchard. Yet each time the handwriting is the same, and each time the patient insists, "We do not rest. We do not rot. We return." It is as though the name itself refuses to stay fixed. As though to speak it, to write it, is to invite it to change, to bleed into other families, other bloodlines. Folklorists have a word for this: onomastic corruption. The belief that certain names carry power, that they resist being recorded, that to write them is to summon them. In European witch trial documents, names of the accused often appear blurred, altered, or inconsistent. Some scholars dismiss this as clerical error. Others suspect deliberate obfuscation. But in the case of the Ashcrofts, the pattern is too persistent, too widespread, too consistent across time. One chilling account comes from a librarian in Pike County who attempted to digitize cemetery records in 2008. She reported that whenever she typed the Ashcroft name into the computer, the machine crashed. When she tried handwriting, the letters came out reversed as if mirrored. She quit the project, telling colleagues, "It's not a name, it's a door." And that may be the key to understanding it. The Ashcroft name is not just a marker of identity. It is an invitation. A portal through which memory and ritual slide, refusing erasure, refusing rest. It explains why obituaries persist but graves do not. Why signatures match across half a century. Why school rosters repeat children unchanged. The name itself carries the curse. Speak it and it rewrites itself. Write it and the record bends. Suppress it and it appears elsewhere. Burn it and it survives in another county's files, another family's bloodline. It is as if the hymn is not the only thing that ensures their return. The name ensures it too. Which leads to the most terrifying implication of all. If the name can shift, if it can rewrite itself into other surnames, then the Ashcrofts never truly ended. They may be the Whitlocks, the Pritchards, the Grimsleys. They may be families names you recognize. The curse may live in bloodlines hidden in plain sight. And if the name itself resists death, if it moves through signatures and ledgers and obituaries, then perhaps the family truly cannot die. The Ashcrofts are not a ghost story. They are a record that rewrites itself. And every time you say their name, you help them return. Every cursed story has a point where the evidence stops, where the files thin into ash and the voices fade into silence. For most families, that point comes with the last gravestone, the final obituary, the final heir leaving town. But with the Ashcrofts, there is no end, only fragments that refuse to stay buried. When archivists tried to assemble a complete genealogy in the 1980s, they found something maddening. The family tree refused to hold still. Children appeared in one census and vanished in the next. Parents died, only to reappear decades later signing deeds in other counties. Names bled into other names, Ashcroft becoming Whitlock, Pritchard, Grimsley. The tree collapsed into a thicket of contradictions, a knot that could not be untangled. One of the researchers, a folklorist named Janet Morell, wrote in her private notes, "Every time I think I have ended the story, I find another branch. It is like trying to chart water. The closer I look, the more it slips away. Perhaps that is the point. Perhaps the curse is not that they will not die, but that we will never stop looking for them." And yet, even Morell left something behind she could not explain. Among her papers, found after her death in 1991, was a burned scrap of a county record. Only 3 words survived on the page: "Do not release." No date. No context. Just those words, the same stamped phrase that once marked the Ashcroft file uncovered in 2009. Other fragments circle the same dark conclusion. A GPS coordinate written on the back of a survey map in 2006, leading to a patch of forest where compasses failed to orient. A courthouse memo from 1974 that ends mid-sentence as though cut off by flame. "The Ashcrofts must not." A student's journal describing her dreams of children standing at the foot of her bed, eyes open, whispering a hymn no one alive should remember. The pattern never resolves. It only frays. And this is perhaps the truest horror of all. Not that the Ashcrofts cannot die, but that their story cannot be completed. Every archive opens onto a gap. Every witness disappears. Every name rewrites itself. The curse is continuity without closure, return without rest. If you stand today on the slope above Cane Ridge, you will see the Ashcroft house, still clinging to its foundation. No sign marks it. No plaque identifies its history. The road that once led there has collapsed into mud. But the house remains, a structure that refuses to surrender, just like the family that built it. Locals say at night you can hear faint singing drifting down the hollow, 3 voices, low and steady, repeating verses no hymnal ever printed. Researchers who follow the trail eventually reached the same conclusion. We weren't meant to know this. The files were burned for a reason. The witnesses were silenced for a reason. And yet the story keeps surfacing, keeps pressing through ash and silence, as if it demands to be told. And that is where the dread settles deepest, not in what has been lost, but in what refuses to stay hidden. Because if the Ashcrofts truly are the family that could not die, then perhaps you carry their blood without knowing it. Perhaps your grandmother's warnings, your family's silences, the names scrubbed from your own tree, are not accidents. Perhaps the hymn waits in your throat, ready to be sung when the time comes. If you've heard the name Ashcroft in your family tree, if you've ever woken to the sound of a hymn you do not know, if your blood runs from these ridges and your elders warned you of a house you must never visit, then you already know what I am telling you. Write it below. Let it be known. And subscribe, because every comment brings another file to light. And even this video may vanish tomorrow.